Well, with only hours left in the session, it is great to be able to touch base with some of those who have been integrally involved in this session and are right down to the final hour. Representative Fred Wilms of Norwalk is our guest, and it's always good to see you, Fred.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on your show.
It is a pleasure. This has been quite a year throughout. There has probably been more agreement this year between R's and D's than in years gone by, but you mentioned one of the obvious reasons that things are smoother. Money.
Well, you know, it's one of the things I think we found is that when there's more money than expected, people seem to be happier, much more, it's easier to agree on things. And, you know, we were talking about this with the federal tax reform that was passed. It's made it advantageous for people to pull their money back from overseas, and when they repatriate the money, they got to pay tax on it, and that's been happening. And now we have, last count I heard is about between 1.2 billion and 1.5 billion of extra money. We think one-shot money that's come in, and so you know the question is, gee, what do we do with that? But that's a good set of problems versus like we have no money and now what do we do?
Well, I was going to say you never have problem finding places to put that money. And apparently a fair amount of it's headed to the rainy day fund.
Yes, as part of the Republican budget that we passed last year, and we've come up with a new budget adjustment. Again, both Senate and House Republicans, we've worked together to put a new budget adjustment through. No new tax increases, preserving the social safety net, fully funding the transportation fund. There was a lot of concern about that. And then more importantly, taking the extra money, putting it in the rainy day fund, funding the unfunded teacher pension plans, retirement plans, the state employee plans that are underfunded, putting the excess money in there and really getting a head start on those obligations.
You know, I think a lot of people who kind of blink at what goes on in Hartford, especially down our way, because everybody knows that Hartford doesn't exist if you're in southwestern Connecticut, except we're paying all the money to Hartford, of course.
Yes.
But when they hear that, you know, many of these things were not funded for like 80 years, you know, the teachers element and so forth, they just said, we'll do it later and later and later. And that bill got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the 8 ball is hit.
It has. And unfortunately, and I think my predecessors from both parties, you know, basically kicked the can down the road. And, well, we've reached the end of the road. And so we're having to deal with that issue. And it's part of the reason why we have this huge fiscal crisis in Connecticut. And it's a big reason why we have people leaving our state, and why our state economy has shrunk 8% in the last 10 years. We're the only state whose GDP has shrunk. And it's a result of bad fiscal decisions that have been made, bad economic policies, and now we're being forced to confront and deal with it.
Well, you mentioned the transportation fund, and this is something that in southwestern Connecticut in particular, but throughout the state, is critical. And we have been behind the 8 ball on for quite a while.
Yes.
How is that being remedied, or at least being patched, if you will?
One of my big bill requests for this year was to address the shortfall in the transportation fund. And Commissioner Meadowcare was going around the state, 5-year gap, and over the next 5 years, a lot of key projects would have to be, defunded, rates would have to go up. And one of the things that I proposed was to move the car sales tax, which is an existing tax. Anytime you buy or you sell a new car, that revenue was going in the general fund. Really, it's transportation. It should go in the transportation fund. And we started doing that last year. I proposed to accelerate that. And by doing so, it solves the transportation fund funding issue. And
when you say accelerate it, what are we doing?
Well, instead of having it kick in full gear, let's say in 2022, we have it starting to kick in full gear next year. So it more comes in faster. And that solves the problem, or a major part of the problem. And that's happening, and certainly in our budget.
So what will that end up covering?
Well, it means that for my constituents who live in New Canaan, there's enough money now available so that the New Canaan line service isn't cut. That was being threatened by the governor. Yeah. And obviously folks are very, very concerned about that. Some of the other projects, bridge, road repair projects that were threatened, those can now continue to move forward. And then there were all these fare hikes that were being threatened, and those now don't have to happen because we're fully funding for the next 5 years that fund.
Well, we've had a lot of fare hikes already in advance of that is for sure, and situation on the New Canaan branch was a big question mark. There's also the suggestion of sticking a new station down in Wall Street in Norwalk.
I love it. I'm totally in favor of it.
Where does that stand? Is that a real possibility?
I think so. You know, there was money in the budget to study that from last year.
Yeah.
It appears that Commissioner Redeker seems to be on board taking a look at that. It makes so much sense for Norwalk. I mean, the Wall Street area was our old downtown, the core part of the of the city, and it's one of the last parts that has yet to be redeveloped. And what we need is, by having a train station right there, where there was one before. If you go back several decades, there was a train station there. It provides that kind of interconnectivity where people can live there in apartments and can then commute and move back and forth. And that's what we need to really transform that area. So I'm a huge supporter of that, and it looks like it may be moving forward.
And Commissioner Redeker has got thumbs up on that?
Well, you know, it's he's willing to take a look at it, and
Okay.
we're getting movement. So I'm feeling cautiously optimistic.
What kind of cost is going to be involved in that, do you think?
The cost?
Has that been looked into?
It has. I think the latest version is there's a downsized kind of train station.
Okay.
I've proposed we wrap it into the Walk Bridge project. You know, that's the railroad bridge over the Norwalk River, and that's being replaced. And there's a lot of work that's being done on the Danbury line that connects into the South Norwalk train station. And they're going to be electrifying the line and doing work almost up to where Wall Street is, very close. And so I'm thinking, and I propose, well, why don't we just move it up another half mile or so, wrap in Wall Street, and candidly, you know, for Norwalk, we're going to have to bear the burden of the construction of the Walk Bridge for the next 3 to 5 years. And we're doing it to benefit the entire Northeast Corridor, because we all agree we need to have Amtrak and Metro North function in the Northeast Corridor.
Sure.
But we're taking one for the team, and you know, I think here's a way we can get some compensation for that.
Well, now, as you suggest, the Walk Bridge is going to be not only a long-term, but an incredibly expensive endeavor.
Yes.
What is the state's obligation in that?
Right now, the cost is $1.1 billion.
For the state?
I think the federal money, the Sandy money, is about $150 million or $200 million. So the rest is the state. So the state's on the hook for the major part of the cost. I've expressed real concerns about what the DOT wants to do. They want to build this very expensive lift bridge. The only reason they say they want to do it is because they want boats and barges that continue going north up towards Wall Street. But anyone who knows that area, anyone in town in Norwalk knows, that area is gentrifying. The businesses are moving out. There's not much barging that happens. The last time it got dredged was 15 years ago. It's not going to get dredged again. And so we don't really need to have a massive project, you know, that's costing over $1 billion just so that we can accommodate a few sailboats that go back and forth.
Now, does that mean that the Corps of Engineers has to weigh in on that?
We would need to get the Coast Guard.
They're the ones who are dragging their feet, I think, on that.
Well, the Corps of Engineers doesn't want to do any more dredging.
Right.
They think it's a waste of money, and I agree with them. But we would need to get the Coast Guard the Coast Guard to agree to decertify that waterway north of the Walk
As
Bridge to
navigable?
Wall Street is no longer a federally navigable harbor way. And you know what? I talked to people around town. They're like, yeah, absolutely. We don't need that. If it's because at the end of the day, it's moving towards what the Saugatuck River looks like in Westport, north of the Iron road bridge there. It's going to become residential. It's going to become parklands, and the businesses are being phased out, and so there's no need for commercial, barging or things like that.
And it will save a substantial chunk of change if you don't have that, right?
We think so. Yeah, we think so.
To be continued.
To be continued.
Fred Wilms, thank you so much for being with us. Always good to see you, my friend.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it.
Representative Fred Wilms, one of those still battling it out with a couple of days left to get the final work done for you. And we're here for you as well with Meet the Leaders. I'm David Smith.